Build creative confidence. Beat the inspiration addiction. Join the Writers' Gym. My guest today is Priya Sharma, the recipient of several British Fantasy Awards and Shirley Jackson Awards, and a World Fantasy author. She's a Locus Award and a Grand Prix de l'Imaginaire finalist, and her work has been translated into Spanish, French, Italian, Czech and Polish. Her fiction has appeared in Interzone, Black Static, Nightmare, Weird Tales and Tor.com, now reactormag.com, and she's been anthologised in many best-of series, including editors such as Ellen Datlow and Paula Guran. She lives in the UK where she works as a medical doctor, and you can find out more about her at priyasharmafiction.wordpress.com. This was something I found really, really enjoyable that I would never have probably thought about otherwise. But I went to your Wikipedia and, you know, Priya Sharma's short story Fabulous Beast won the 2016 British Fantasy Award, and All the Fabulous Beasts won the 2018 Shirley Jackson Award, and debut novella Orm Shadow won the 2019 Shirley Jackson Award and the 2020 British Fantasy Award for Best Novella. And that's when we've just got going. And then I went over to your website bio, which said, I live and work in the UK. I started writing in 2004 and was drawn to speculative fiction. I have a computer, but prefer a fountain pen and a notebook. As you can see, I'm not very good at writing about myself. I'd much rather be writing about someone else. And I think what I enjoyed so much about that was I'm not convinced that it's I'm not good at it. It's I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy writing about myself.
Not really. I was very fortunate in this. There's a project called Writers' Mosaic, which was set up by the Royal Literary Society, looking at international writers in the UK working. And they asked me to write some non-fiction pieces, which I felt were quite introspective. I don't mind introspection, but I like to filter it through fiction. So there's a lot of me in what I write, I think, and a lot of family history and a lot of personal issues, but it's heavily disguised. So yeah, I mean, I love fiction as a way of looking at the world anyway. But yeah, no, I mean, and some people are very good. They write very witty bios. Like, you know, I come from a long line of, you know, I've escaped the family tar and feather business and now I write fiction. You don't need to look at me. You know, the work is first, if you like. And why? Nobody needs to know what I've had for breakfast. Nobody needs to know about, you know, I've just had a fish supper. No one's interested. All our lives are equally mundane. That's not where life is magic. No, I'm being tongue in cheek. But I think I'm very ordinary in a lot of ways.
You're reminding me of something a jazz singer friend of mine told me, that she'd met a lady through gigging. So this person was a fan broadly, but they were friends. They'd met through gigging, and she was on the phone as she was doing her laundry. She's putting laundry outside, and the woman said, "So what are you up to today?" She said, "I'm just doing my laundry." And was I can't picture you doing that. As if because you do something cool, you're somehow exempt from.
Yeah. I mean, you know, unless you've got a flotilla of people around you, I always imagine actors to be the worst for that. Possibly actors and rock stars, but maybe I'm being a bit unfair. I think writers on the whole are just generally, I can't remember who it was, a woman who's an interview who's got an amazing voice, and she did a Sky programme on books. And a name will come to me. Very, very cool. Really interesting person in her own right. But she said, I think in a column she once wrote, it's always actors and I think it's rock stars that come with the most baggage. So they tend to bring their manicurists, all very tongue in cheek, but, you know, and then actors. But then the writers always turn up on their own, having got the train, and always tend to be early and just really happy to be there. So, yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that we all need to come to, but I guess we come to it, is our right to everything that we have experienced, that we have thought about, that we have questioned. And this is why I love the example that you're giving, that it's not that the memoir side of things or that the autobiographical side of things is not invited to the party. It's just that the way that you write, you've got access to everything that you've ever experience being thought, but you use it as fuel for the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you scratch the surface of anybody and they're carrying all these stories all the time, aren't they? All that human experience. And, you know, I've been very fortunate in my life in that I've had the privilege of things like travel and work with a broad variety of people, which is lovely. And all of that informs what I do. But I think what boils down to it is that human connection, the human experience. And I think if you can tap into that for yourself and write that, other people will feel the truth of that, even though they might not know where it is in your work.
I had an example of that when I was rereading some of your stories, and something that is very, very different for me is that I'm quite physically squeamish, as in real life, as in blood. I used to think I didn't like horror way back when because I thought body horror was the only way. I did not understand. It was a lot of things, including all the things I already loved, like gothic fiction. And yeah, but when you're talking, I'm going to try and do this without spoilers, but when we have a gentleman and a lady having a conversation about hands, and yes. I'm going to do this without spoilers, but he's quite exacting in his requirements, and the way that both the emotional life of it and the tension was so brilliant, but also knowing that you have a medical background, looking at things like that, about how the knowledge of the machinery of the body comes into it a lot. I find that I am learning, or I am finding words, or I am finding connections that I didn't know before from that. And I just think that's such a beautiful example of how I think a lot of us can sometimes worry that it's all about finding time to write, but it's also the fact that whatever else you're doing with your life is material for your writing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it doesn't matter what it is. Every job, every industry, every facet of your life will have its own language and will have its own beauty and have its own oddness. Whatever you do, you'll be privy to something that's quite unique. And I think to be able to carry that into what you write. I don't know about you, but I really love kind of almost a specialist story. I quite enjoy that when I think, this person has done this. They have deconstructed a gun. This person knows what this is like. This person's actually been, I think, in hospital and experienced that as a patient and understands what that process is like, physically and emotionally. So I think we've all got our things. I think obviously we handle that with care, don't we? Especially when there's another party involved and there's a certain sensitivity around that. As a GP, I would never carry over a person's personal stories or anything that is confidential. But I think broadly speaking, like the human experience, I mean, just think if, I think about, for example, beauticians, hairdressers, the intimacy of touching another human body and talking to them and listening to that story and making that person comfortable, or if that person's not comfortable, what do you think's going on? Just really simple things. We touch people every day, don't we?
Yeah, it's such a great comparison, because I was thinking about how with a hairdresser, if the client is too afraid to have an opinion and is just going to go, yes, no, sure, they're much more likely to come out with something they don't like. And
it's a relationship, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not, please give me a Jennifer Aniston bob. And that's it. There's a relationship there of some sorts, isn't there? And it's quite a personal thing, isn't it? If you've had a bad experience, that you remember that.
Oh, yeah. And that ability to get somebody to be themselves, and then you pick up on that and it flows. For me, again, it is such a comparison with writing, because my thing is always the artist's palette, that you've got your memory, you've got your imagination, you've got your observation, you've got your questions about the world. And your job is to get out of your own way. It's to get rid of the do I have the right to this, and channel that into curiosity so that you can do that. And I feel like that's what's going on in a good haircut as well, that it becomes a conversation.
Yeah. And it fascinates me to hear you talk as well, because obviously, you've got a very psychological relationship with the people that you work with, the writers that you work with. You are a kind of psychoanalyst. You're not just facilitating them. I think you're doing something slightly different again. I think there's an element of trying to coax and understand people. So again, you're sort of privy to a whole different way of working, but also I'm quite envious of the fact that I think it must make you more analytical about writing. I don't know if that's the case, or the process.
I don't know if this is an answer or a different question, but where a lot of this came from is when I got clearer and more specific about what I wished I'd had and knew that I wanted to create that in the world. Fundamentally, what I knew I needed to provide was a psychologically safe space for people to go there, because we talk a lot about vomit drafts, but it means that we don't have anymore that massive, great thick wall between over here is my writing and over here is my emotional and physical life. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of people who think that's what it's about. It's about putting on this terribly professional work face and separating. And I don't know about you, but the more free I feel to be every aspect of me, the more articulate I become, the more comfortable I am in a room, because I've got you know, it's all of me that you are talking to. And yes, you know, I choose my layers of self-disclosure. I choose how much I let out, but I'm in charge of the choosing. So that was why I thought it was important. I mean, what it came from for me was an early, very, very difficult feedback situation. Right. I essentially got roasted in quite a personal way for using personal material. Now, I could have taken from that, you're not supposed to use personal material. Or I could have taken from that what I hope I have taken from that, which is know why you're using it. It's not just finger pointing. It's not just, you know, mean person, good person, you know, telling the reader what to think. It's going somewhere more curious than that. And I think this is why your fiction appeals to me so much, that I know that you don't choose to say this. I mean, obviously you always can, but you're not about going, this is where it came from. You're about, this is what it's asking. This is where it is now. Yeah. And for me, some people get there on their, not that any of us get there on their own, but some people get there however they get there. Other people, and I was certainly one of them, definitely needed the hand-holding, needed to be put in enough positions where I realised we do all have the right to everything that's ever happened to us. And I think the person that I happen to have put on a pedestal, which is never all that helpful in the first place, but he wanted a very different kind of writing on the page anyway. So what was a hard lesson for me, and I guess maybe is answering this, or maybe it's just about something completely different, is that it's not about pleasing somebody else. You know, you can have, and I'm sure you do, I certainly do, have friends who are into a completely different style or kind of writing than I will ever be into. Yeah. But it doesn't stop you appreciating there's a lot of things out there. We've all got it differently. And, you know, you can very much be richer for not being the same as other people.
Yeah. And what teacher wants to churn out a dozen people who are writing the same stuff in the same way? And I mean, this whole course is dedicated to how to give constructive criticism, you know, and how you help somebody, how you facilitate someone to write their best work. I've never done courses, and I kind of, part of me wishes I had been brave enough, but I think you were braver than I am, because I was scared of that happening. I was scared of unlearning stuff just because of experiences from school with the arts. I'm glad that you came through that and became better than that person was at doing what you do.
Thank you. I remember you saying something that I think is enormously important and is absolutely parallel with this, which was when I was having a difficult situation, when I was publishing I was in the middle of working towards one of my collections, and you were brilliant. You sat with me, talked about all these different things that we could do. And I remember you saying how daft it was that there are people out there who will deliberately sort of pull up the ladder by which they climbed themselves, and our job is to not do that. I would say I put you and the guy that I spoke to as complete opposite ends of, you know, how we can respond as humans, and you know which side I'm on.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of people doing brilliant work in, say, you know, the British Fantasy Society, who are working as mentors now, people like yourself, people who are hugely generous with the time and say, you know, let's look at drafts for each other. Let's see what we can do. Oh, these opportunities are out there, you know, submit. I mean, Tim Major does this lovely newsletter that's full of markets, you know, so I kind of get the feeling, and I know sometimes it feels hard maybe to break into like writing groups and writing circles, but I think, you know, genre, I think are pretty good at trying to give each other a leg up in terms of help. And
it is about walking through that door, isn't it? It is, as we were saying about the writing itself, it's about knowing that you are invited to that party, that you can do that. But I'm going to ask a little bit about the alternative in a way, because I'm curious that I get the feeling your process and what works for you is kind of not the opposite to that, but you've found a system that works for you. And you mentioned earlier that you didn't want the idea that somebody could take it. So are you quite solitary about the process?
I've got better as I've felt more confident, because I think the thought of standing up in a room and reading a piece of work and having a critique in front of a class just crippled me. I thought, I cannot do that. There's no way I'm going to do that. And it took me a long, long time to get to a point where I could even finish a short story. So I think what everyone else has done has clearly helped them to cut short that process. But mine was all trial and error, really painful, really difficult, a lot of really awful pastiches to writers that I loved. And it took me a long time to get there. And only when I started to slowly get published a little bit more. I kind of, and met people and came to sort of trust them. Then I was able to say to friends, would you just look at this draft? Because not really feeling it. I'm stuck with this. You know, and I don't do it a lot, but there are people I will do that with, or they will send me stuff. And I feel a little bit more confident about that. I don't think I would ever be a good teacher. I think teaching and facilitating is a very good skill, but it is its own skill set. And I think there are people who write who can't teach, vice versa, if you get what I mean.
Oh, I totally do. I'm so glad that it's changed, that I think people used to, a lot of the louder people in the industry, the whole you can't teach creative writing thing. No, but you can coach it. You can bring it out of people. And you're absolutely right. It's a different skill set.
Yeah.
But it's that thing that I actually first heard through Will Smith on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, where he was having an argument with his uncle about, you know, you and Aunt Vivian made the money, not me. And the uncle was going, essentially, bullshit. You know, we worked damn hard to open that door for you, and you are no less of a man for walking through it. And that's how I feel about it. That, you know, there used to be, even when I was doing my qualification in teaching creative writing, they gave a whole module to can you teach creative writing, and I was just thinking, all of this is imposter syndrome, and it's getting so much attention. Whereas if you make it not what does it say about me and more what does it do, you get more conversation, you get more of this in the world. Yeah.
And that's it. Because I think I was afraid. I kind of didn't. I just sort of chugged away on my own.
But this is what worked. And the thing is, I don't want to push you on this and spend just for you, but historically I have found you to be incredibly modest about the very, very, very cool things that you do. And I'm just thinking, is there a side of it that wasn't, I'm not saying it didn't take longer than it might have done, but you knew what works for you and did it.
There was this point in which I think you've got to be careful about what works for you, because I think it changes. And what worked for me at the start isn't working for me now. I'll be honest with you. So I've got to look at it in a slightly different way. And I think maybe, I don't know if that's your experience or your experience with the people that you work with in coaching, but what worked for me 10 years ago, I can't do that anymore, because at the start I was sometimes doing like 30 drafts of the same story.
And if it's okay to ask, just because, I mean, to answer your question, yes, totally. For everybody, things change, and sometimes we have to spend a long time catching up with ourselves. So 100% yes. But if it's okay to ask, because I think this would be just so useful for people, what did used to work? Because the thing is, it can be because your lifestyle changes and the time looks different, or it could be just it doesn't work for me for emotional, mental reasons. You know, there's a million ways that can go. So what used to work?
I found doing all those drafts was my way of working out the story and actually finding out who the characters were, which is great. But it was also learning to write, actually learning what a good sentence looked like, to me anyway. And I appreciate every writer is different.
Oh yeah, but this is why specificity is important, because the more specific we are, the more we understand ourselves being different.
So that was me also learning my own style and moving away from trying to copy the writers that I loved. So there was so many layers of what was going on there in that 30 drafts. It wasn't just telling the story and finding out who the characters were and changing that story and becoming satisfied with the story arc and the character development, but it was also learning style, learning language, learning structure. And now I've moved away from doing the writing at the page as much. So I've kind of figured out, I think the fallacy of having to be at the page every day to write, for me, it's not a thing. And I know that's probably, some people will shriek with horror at that because it's bad writing hygiene. But you know what, after a 12-hour day at work, I do not want to come home and sit down. I want to have my tea and put on some slippers, and that's what I'm going to do to get ready for the next day at work.
And there's other ways of writing every day than writing every day, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And
it happens to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I remember Sarah Pinsborough once saying, you know what, I had an awful writing day and I went to the pub, and I remember I thought of one plot point that changed everything. And that was my work for the day. So I think everybody is different. And I think accepting that actually I can get a story down to some satisfaction in fewer drafts now pleases me greatly. The one thing I miss is time, because I don't have the same amount of time. I could leave a story, leave it for 12 months, leave it for 18 months, let it cook, come back to it. For me, time is a definite ingredient. I don't like finishing a story and sending it straight off. I loathe that. I always ask for long lead-in times if I'm going to be working with an editor. And if someone says to me, look, I've got 8 weeks, give me something, I'm like, that's not going to happen. I can't do it. I want to do it, but I can't do it because I do like that extra bit of time. For me, that is part of it. And I don't know if my stories have suffered a little bit for shortening that time process or not. I don't know.
Would that have been the same at the beginning? Because now, I mean, I know you probably don't like hearing me say it in these terms, but you're recognised, you've got all these awards. From where I'm sitting, you have evidence that, you have evidence. Whereas when we're just starting out, it can feel different. Would you have said the same thing back then if somebody said 8 weeks? No, or would you have said yes?
No, I would have absolutely run for the hills. I wouldn't have even dared. Wouldn't even dare. But now I can work with slower lead-in times. But if it's very short, it doesn't satisfy me.
Yeah,
I don't know about you.
sense.
I mean, what's your average? In writing a short story, for example, if someone says, "Look, we need 6,000 words from you," what would you do?
I like the challenge because for me, the big obstacle was always knowing you're allowed to do it. And the thing that it's not why I started the Green Ink sponsored write, because we used to be Green Ink Writers Gym before the Writers Gym and Green Ink sponsored write. All of that green was from Macmillan Cancer Support, and it was all in memory of this friend. And literally how that happened was I was sitting in Starbucks, which happened to be her favourite cafe, which, as you know, green. And the idea just of the sponsored write happened to me. And it's only happened a small number of times in my life where I've gone, that idea is so clear and specific. It's not even about it being a good idea. It just fundamentally exists. Therefore, it needs to happen. Okay, then this needs to happen. And that is how I've got around stage fright. That is how I've got around the who does she think she is fears that you think are about other people and are always about what you think of yourself. Yeah. And it's just a case of get out there and say it. Was, okay, so I will contact, because this was way before the Writers' Gym, so it was a case of I will contact friends who want to be writers, published authors. I knew a few through Transport. I knew next to nobody who wanted to do this. And we will do a day of writing for Macmillan Cancer Support because I don't like swimming, running, all of that. I'm never going to do a sponsored anything like that. No, thank you. But I like writing and I want to do more of it. But the thing is that would never have probably happened if I wasn't struggling to write, because the thing was that I was not wasting all my time, but all of my time was going into theatre because that was what I'd grown up in, what the people that I was involved with were involved in, and the time got eaten that way. And that was probably my subconscious going, look, do something rather than nothing. It started moving me back to writing. So I guess as an offshoot of that, I've got used to the fact that doing something on a very quick deadline is something that happens to me once a year, that for sometimes better, sometimes worse, but it's something that happens. And the reason it worked for beginner writers was that it wasn't about the writing, it was about the charity. So it gave you that excuse to say, not, oh God, what if it's shit? Because it exists. It's making the money for the charity. Real, actual lives are being improved in, you're doing your bit in doing that. And it took away a lot of the emotional self-torture.
Yeah.
So I do it for that reason. But at the same time, is it how I would ideally do a story? No.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, but part of the pleasure is discovering the story for myself, and that sometimes takes time.
Yeah. I'm a fan of the fake ending. I was actually doing this at Century in our workshop on Friday. I was talking to some people about this, where one of the ways a lot of people tend to hold themselves back is by never finishing. Because when you don't finish it, you never get to see it evolve, and that way you can stay in the it could have been perfect honest mode in your head. And so what I taught myself to do was the fake ending. And you have an agreement with yourself that this does not have to be how it really ends. They will turn into rabbits and fly off in pink wings into the sunset at the end. It doesn't have to have anything to do with it, but or be what you think it's going to be. I'm exaggerating, you'd finish it in whatever way you can, but knowing that you're going to go back and on the next layer, you're going to change it all. I found that enormously liberating. And I think that maybe plays in with short time frames. It sort of makes you less squeamish about finishing.
I've done it with people with novels where they said to me, I'm struggling at the moment, when we've been just chatting and said, write the last chapter. Doesn't matter if it's wrong, just write the last chapter, keep the momentum going. Because it's that whole airplane analogy, isn't it? The worst part is getting the plane in the air. Once you've got the plane in the air, you're cruising, which is the dynamics of it, much less energy, and then you can land. But if you can't get up there to cruising height, you're going to be struggling. And part of that is just putting your little roadmap. And the thing is, all journeys change, don't they? And they should change. So it's, I think it's great advice. I've done it a few times because I don't always write short stories in, I can't sit down at the start and write right to the end. I write in scenes, and then I will sort of fill in what needs to be filled in and like make it look seamless. But yeah, putting that last scene down can make such a difference.
Can I ask a very boring, practical how sort of question about fitting life in? Because your job as a doctor, I don't know if my assumptions are correct, and please tell me if they're not, but I'm guessing there's sometimes a sort of we need you now aspect to it. Are you able to plan days where you're not going to be interrupted, or how does that work?
In terms of sort of working life for me, obviously I kind of had set days, but then I work on days when I'm not in because there's other stuff that needs doing behind the scenes, as most doctors do, whether it be the admin side of things, which is the kind of stuff that I will do on the days I'm not in, or extra phone calls or whatever, or bits and pieces. Whereas some people are in general practice are very involved in management and practice development and local communities and stuff. So it's different. But I think with every job, everybody's got life, haven't they? And most, not all, but most people I know are juggling lots of things, including writing.
Have you found that you've got better at giving yourself some sort of hard boundaries, as in this day I am not available, or what works?
I think it waxes and wanes, and I think everybody's, like juggling kids, carers, they're working, they work for themselves. So I think modern life is very complicated, isn't it? And I think obviously working from home as well for some people, when I think about them who have had to blend in writing with home life and all that kind of stuff, and work at home as well, it's changed the dynamic of everything. And it's hard because I find that the last thing that I prioritise, unless I'm working on a project, like when I wrote Pomegranates and I was working towards that, I knew I'd got a deadline. It was a very big piece of work for me, so I had to make sure I was working weekends and doing all the extra bits in the week to get it in. But I think I love the analogy that we're all juggling, but we've got to work out which balls are plastic and which are glass. So which can we drop and which can't we? And I think you've just got to learn to sort of prioritise what needs to be done, what has to be done. And I've had to sort of be a bit clever about working small chunks of time to my advantage. So if I've got 15 minutes, and that's a way of getting myself to the page as well, because there are days when I just think, I do not want to do this. I can't cope with this. Whereas other people, I think, just love getting to the page. I don't always have to get up to that cruising height, as it were. So for me, having that 15 minutes, it doesn't frighten me. It's not like saying, here, you can write for 3 hours, in which case I might be quite terrified. It's 15 minutes, right, just get down what you can. And even if it's a bit of dialogue, part of a scene, bit of a roadmap for what you're going to do, it's a good way of just getting yourself to the page and fitting around life.
That's such a good example, because there are people I know who would hear cruising altitude and think that had to be a bunch of time, because, one of the classic ways people scare themselves off is not being able to use those 5 minutes, 15 minutes. But you actually treat it the opposite way, don't you? That you're almost more put off by bigger.
Yeah. It's it, because I just start, after 40 minutes, I'll start procrastinating, thinking, oh God, let's go and put a wash on. I think there are times when you've got to protect those hours. And I think there are certain days I know that I'm off work and there's things that I need to do. And if I've got the opportunity, I will get out of the house and take my writing, take my laptop, take my notebook or whatever, and get away. And I think that allows you deep thinking time, as it were. I think there's loads of studies and podcasts around deep thinking. But to actually put yourself in a slightly different environment where nobody's going to ring you, or, you can't go and do the hoovering. Don't go and make a cup of tea. All that rubbish that, we kid ourselves with. So that works as well. And I think it's just maybe just trimming your sails for each day. And the whole thing about the 15 minutes actually came from a point in my career where I'd left one job and I was very unhappy and I just needed to make a break and perhaps find a new way of working with different people. And I went on this, it was a course, just a very short course with other doctors, and the whole point was around retention, because there was a time when, well, there still is a time when lots of people are retiring, people are leaving the country to work abroad. We're trying to retain the NHS workforce. So as part of that, we were looking at a whole variety of things, but one was about tackling those massive things that you just don't know what to start with. And there was a great little medical podcast called Boiling the Frog. At what point are we all going to hop out of that boiling water? But the 15-minute thing came from that. And I found that really useful. And it's been a bit of a transferable skill to all the, even things like, filling out paperwork and forms that I've been putting off, all that kind of stuff. So that 15 minutes, actually, if you concentrate your mind, you can fill that unforgiving 15 minutes.
With so much more than 3 hours of, I should be doing something.
Yeah, absolutely. And ignore social media, ignore the tyranny of the word count, other people's word counts.
And other people's expectations or other people's schedules.
Yeah. Cheer them on. Brilliant. Love what you're doing. But the only person that you're in competition with is yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Most of the things, as I say, that I've done with the Writer's Gym or with my career have been about what do I wish I'd had. And one of the memes that I did for me, and the rest of the world was welcome to share it if they wanted to, was your only real competition is the version of yourself that chooses fear over curiosity or listens to fear over curiosity. Because that, I think, is what it is. It's you've either got this makes me curious or but it could go wrong. What if it goes wrong? And you then never find out.
Yeah. And that's it. Curiosity is such a lovely word. And I think play is another one, because we unlearn playing, and a lot of creativity is rooted in play. And I think we get very tramlined about what creativity is as well, and how other creative practice can impact on our writing, and enjoyment of other creative work feed into writing as well, be it art or film and I appreciate you probably got a million films at home, because I appreciate you're a really big film buff. I imagine your home not just to be full of books, but great films that you've seen and kind of perhaps infuses your writing.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I suppose the reason it just it does feel relevant is that I'm aware, talking to you about how it feels to be a writer, and, people will say things to me that from where somebody else is standing, there's always going to be somebody to look at going, they've already arrived somewhere. And I think the thing that we definitely do have in common as a species is that we all think somebody else got the memo, that somebody else is sort of sorted. And I think the thing that's been so important to me once I've realised that is then understanding that it is a leap of faith. It's if I feel like this, it's not unreasonable to think that, and if a load of the people that I know feel like that, it's not unreasonable to think a load of people I don't know feel like that as well.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, I think, where the way that I dealt with not only writing anxiety, but social anxiety and just a bunch of other anxieties is what if, because it's always what if, and it is always play, it is always imagination. What if everybody else is feeling like that? And the thing about a background in theatre is that, if I don't know that play is how you get the best work out of yourself, then what hope do people who've grown up in accountancy have? That it's exactly as you say. It's about finding that play. I wonder, actually, I think there's a lot in common about what you've discovered about yourself and what works for you along the way, and the fact that it does change as our lives change things. I always use my cat as an example. My beloved cat that I used to have, one week there was only this sofa in the whole world, and then another week there's only that sofa in the whole world. And, he'd do that. And I find that it helps me to go to cafes, to go to that sofa, to go to this desk, to go and do the washing and finish whatever I'm doing before the end of the washing. And you make your little inroads into what works for you. I'm wondering around that, what I talk about as creative confidence, as that curiosity in order to create not only the writing that you want to do, but also the circumstances that mean that you're feeding into it, that you are having a sort of satisfying or you're fueling yourself is probably a better way of saying it. Have there been times when you've needed to sort of find something different? Because you said it has changed for you. Either the system wasn't doing for you what it had done before. Did you change your approach, or was it a case of sort of giving yourself a talking to and saying, we don't have to do it like that?
Yeah, I think it's strange. I don't know about you, and I don't know how it works not for all short stories, but I think sometimes, especially long pieces and like novellas, and I've only written a couple of novellas, but I think you're always learning. Novelists say it, don't they? You know, you think you know how to write your book, you're just learning how to write this book.
Yeah. And the next book that comes along will need different parenting.
A different process. Or there are times when certain projects I've had to research very heavily, and that's really kick-started me and made me fall in love with the whole thing all over again and the whole process. There have been times when, I know it sounds daft, but just making physical changes for myself, like sleeping and keeping regular hours and eating and drinking properly, and I like stripping everything back to basics. Just to feel physically well enough and in the right space to kind of do it. Because I think writers aren't very good necessarily at healthy living and caretaking. Like, get down and stretch, because your back and your neck are going to pay for it later on.
Yeah.
Daft though that sounds.
Oh, no. This chair that I'm on now that does this, for people not watching on YouTube, I just went back a very long way from the screen. That is for that reason. It's made a huge difference.
Yeah. Switching up places, sometimes just going back to why you fell in love with writing as well. And for me, that's reading a book that makes me think, or rereading something by a writer that I love, and just getting in touch with what made me think I wanted to pick up a book and, pick up and write. For me, that was Angela Carter. Just remembering what it is about what you do that you love, and maybe also picking up something old that you've written and thinking, oh my God, not this was terrible. In my case, it probably was terrible, but look what I'm doing now.
Look where I am.
Yeah. So progress is to be made. And I think there's a lot to be said for, and it's funny, I think about 7 years ago, my partner gave me a book to read. And this is just about life, not just about writing. The subtle art of not giving a fuck.
Yeah.
And I have to say, very frat boy, and I've said this before, I know when I've talked about this book, very frat boy in how it's written. But I think the inherent message is that nobody gives a fuck. Nobody cares if I fall on my face. They might laugh for a minute, but then I'm gone. They'll forget me. And do you know what? That's fine. That is really liberating.
I have one a bit like that I found really helpful, which was Olivia Jewell's and the Overactive Imagination by Helen Fielding.
I'm going to write that down.
So the Bridget Jones author. And it was just this one line that the character says in their head, which is they're not thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves just like you are. Yeah. And that for me, don't remember very much else about the book, if I'm honest, but that right now I need to go and read it again. But that line I found, I don't like the word perfect, and I don't use it unless I have a very good reason, but that encapsulated how we can fall over our own psychology and how we don't need to.
And that has impacted quite a lot for me, because it took me a long time to get over social anxiety. And that was very hard, because I was very shy when I was young, very shy. And I think I've just got to this equilibrium in life where I think, well, you know, what's going to happen?
It's almost like, I think a lot of us find ways to, it isn't get around it, but it is give ourselves enough evidence that we do exist on our own terms and that we have every right to. And I don't think that the wish that everybody's going to like you goes away, but I think that the idea that it needs to be like that, or that it can be like that, has faded. And that, I think, is a very good thing. I think also for me, the ideas are like fish idea that David Lynch, I'll try not to spend too many hours going on about David Lynch, but the idea that if you are sitting in a desert with a fishing line going, why aren't I catching any fish? What's wrong with me? If your lifestyle is not feeding you, if it's not putting you in that state, it's not for the world to change. It's for you to work out what the rivers are for you and to work out how to get to them. And yes, there will always be reasons that's incredibly difficult, and it will always be imperfect, but you can start moving towards it. And then the other one about having a notebook that I love, it's like, oh yeah, no, a fish has just come past. I'll go and catch it when I can be bothered, or when I'm less busy. And of course it's a fish. It's going to be somewhere else by then. Yeah. And just the fact that it being on you to make those things happen is not a nasty thing. It's an amusing and empowering thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if we're in our own head and worrying about interactions with people and what they think of us, we missed out on a great chance to actually make a real genuine connection. And isn't that one of the most enriching things? You know, I'm not talking about necessarily suddenly being everyone's best friend, but what I mean is something, having some form of exchange, no matter how small it is, socially, that just enriches everything.
And being able to do that rather than not do that means you're already part of it. You're showing yourself your value and that everybody is interlinked, and that's a really cool thing.
Yeah. And it positively reinforces itself, because the moment you start doing that, people respond to you in a slightly different way.
And it's so lovely that when you were guest of honour at, I want to say FantasyCon, there's so many conventions that I now panic.
You're right. Yeah, British FantasyCon.
Right. Thank you.
That was nice.
Well, this is, I am now able to forget where I was a few months ago. That's not discouraging at all.
No, I don't know where I was this morning, to be quite honest. So sometimes I wake up and think, what time is it? What should I be in work today? What's going on?
The thing that I remember is a member of the Writers' Gym was her first FantasyCon, and I love this feeling where you can hear somebody talking about people you know with certainly Priya Sharma, and I'm going, I wish Priya Sharma could hear you talking about Priya Sharma, because both those Priya Sharmas are real, but you know, the way that you talk about yourself, and not that this is not a bad thing, it's an enjoyable, wonderful thing, but you don't do the airs. You absolutely have always lived for me the fact that everybody, you know, we're all writers, we're all writing.
Absolutely. And I'm a tiny minnow, because you've got writers there who are professionals, who are like people like Adam Neville and Sarah Pinsborough, Alison Littlewood, Nina Allen. The thing is, be small. Make your writing big, but be small, you know, and talk to people. Otherwise you're a jackass. Yeah. You know, I remember meeting one person, and I won't say who it is, the very first con that I ever went to, British Fantasy Con that I went to. And he was on the step, and I come with a couple of people that I knew who are lovely people, good friends. And I was stood on my own on the step, and I went, "Oh, hi, this is my first con. Who are you?" And it was so withering. He just went, "I'm the guest of honour." And I just thought, "Oh, you twat." Yeah, anyway, but.
And that versus how the guests of honour have spoken to me, like, "Oh, hi, and what are you doing?" And oh god,
yeah. So don't do that. Whoever's watching you when your moment of glory happens.
Yeah.
But anyway, everyone's the same.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to start with your name and then I'm the guest of honour, and
or just
what's your
this
name?
Is who I am.
Yes, there are many ways of handling that one that are not that. Wow. I am going to ask my magic little question, which is, what haven't I asked you about that you might like me to ask you about?
I mean, I love art. I get loads of inspiration from art, and I don't know if you've got people in your groups that are visual. Paintings, for me, as a kid, I remember my parents used to get this magazine once a month, and it was like the Great Artist series. But for me, that was an absolute education in storytelling. You know, same about music. A good bit of music is a story. You know, growing up, I was a Kate Bush fan. And everything is a story for Kate Bush, isn't it? But, you know, I wrote a story called The Ghost of a Flea, written about William Blake's Ghost of a Flea, which is just a mind-boggling, bonkers painting. One about Picasso's Minotaurs. So art, for me, visually, I get a real kick out of walking around a gallery, because there's always a story there that I want to take away.
I'm going to rephrase that as a recommendation, because I think that's a writing tool. Go to a gallery. Yeah. Walk around. Yeah. Because it's such a great way of knowing yes, everybody might see the same thing, but nobody ever gets the same thing from that thing.
And photojournalism, another example of great storytelling. You know, when it's done well, sometimes it's not, it can be quite opaque as an art, but it always fascinates me. You know, how do you do that? Because they spend as much time not just like looking for that moment, for that story, but actually doing what a brilliant writer would do. So they're looking at visuals, they're thinking about construction, framing, all of those things. So I've got a great deal of respect for photographers.
Well, it sounds like this is the time to say an enormous thank you. Priya Sharma, thank you for joining the Writers' Gym. You've visited the Writers' Gym with author and coach Dr. Rachel Knightley. Production and sound design are by Ashley Lexine, and theme music is by Chris Gregory. To join a Writers' Gym workout online or in London, as a guest or as a member, Visit writersgym.com or email thewritersgym@rachelknightley.com.